Hello chess friends, it's Grandmaster Max Illingworth here, and today I'm going to be showing you an incredible game from the Magnus Carlsen Invitational 2020. This game was played just yesterday, and it features the players Ding Liren as white and Maxim Vachier-Lagrave as black, two of the very best players in the world. And previously in this match, they had the match tied 2-2 after 4 games in round 6 of the Magnus Carlsen Invitational. And that means that they had to play an Armageddon game to decide who would win the match to ensure that there would indeed be a winner. And the way the Armageddon works is, well, one player gets white and gets 5 minutes for the game. The player playing black gets less time, 4 minutes. But the catch is that black gets draw odds. So that means if the game ends in a draw, then black wins the Armageddon and wins the match. So it ensures that there must be a winner of the match. And you won't believe what happened in this game, where Ding just completely destroyed MVL. And now you can see how to punish a very common trap at club level in the Slav Defence. I remember using this trap myself in a lot of games with whites to win many times at the club level as a junior. So let's get into the game then. And it went as follows. We had d4, d5. Maxim Vachier-Lagrave normally prefers the Grunfeld defense, which is with knight f6, g6 and d5. But for this tournament he decided to vary and play the Slav instead, with d5, c4 and c6. Which can have the idea of trying to take the pawn on c4 at some moments and create a nice pawn chain. Ding played knight f3, knight f6, and Ding brought the other knight out with knight c3. And I learned from the French stream that actually MVL had blundered in this position by making a pre-move. And what a pre-move is, it's where we make a move on the board before the opponent makes their move. So he might, for example, draw c takes d5 as a pre-move in anticipation of white playing c takes d5 to try to potentially save a second on the clock, since time, after all, is somewhat important in blitz. But it appears that MVL had pre-moved the move bishop to f5 in this position, which is quite well known to be a mistake, even though it's one of the most common moves at the low to intermediate club level. So what would you play in reply as whites against bishop to f5? If you need more time to think about it, you can pause the video, decide on your move, and then come back for the answer. Okay, so instead of bishop f5, what black should have played is one of the following 3 moves. Should either play e6, the semi-Slav defense. It does shut in the bishop, but often you'll see that bishop get out to b7 later anyway, so it's not a big issue. Also, d takes c4 is a major move, with the idea of trying to defend that pawn with b5 for as long as possible. And there's also the Trebanenko with a6, which is sort of a waiting move, sort of keeping white guessing as to whether we'll play bishop f5 or e6, or maybe even a different plan like b5 or even g6. So you could say it's the flexible approach for black. But bishop f5 is unfortunately a mistake here. And the main reason is that the b7 pawn is left undefended. And that's a common disadvantage of developing your queen's bishop early, either bishop f5 or bishop f4, is it does leave you vulnerable to a queen b3 or queen b6 tactic, depending on the color. But if you played queen b3 immediately, then black would actually be able to respond with queen to b6. And the point is that c takes d5 is not winning a pawn, because black can play queen takes b3, a takes b3, and then knight takes d5. And since white is left with these doubled pawns, he doesn't really have much of an edge, even though he has the central majority in this position. So it's a typically solid Slav position for black. And I think there was a very nice game, but I think it was Janowski against Capablanca, if I remember correctly, which I think I'm due to cover in my group relatively soon. Perhaps I can even cover it in a channel if we get enough requests, because a really instructive positional win by black. But it turns out we can improve this queen b3 idea by first playing c takes d5 exclamation mark. So now, if black were to play c takes d5, the problem is he's developed the bishop too early, and that means that queen b3 is now hitting both the pawn on b7 and the pawn on d5. Now I won't go into every single way this can play out, but just to show a couple of moves. I mean, if black tries to defend the b7 pawn with the queen, he runs into all sorts of problems. You know, queen c8 or queen c7 is simply running into knight d5. Queen d7 is running into knight to e5 as such. So if black doesn't really have any great queen moves, then, well, his position is really not great. A move like bishop c8 might be the best one, but then black has basically lost 2 moves for development, and white has a vastly improved exchange Slav, even if he were just to develop normally, let's say. And if they play a move like b6, which is why I remember having one student I coached in the past who wanted to just know every single detail of how to refute b6. So it's something I happen to study, and well, if you want an added challenge, you can pause the video and decide what you would play as white, or you can just go ahead and find out the answer. So the key move here is actually to play the move e4. It's true if you went knight e5 first, it would quite likely transpose. But the idea of this pawn sack is that you're aiming to get in bishop b5 with a tempo. So if black were to play d4, for example, we go knight e5, threatening a checkmate on f7. And the point is that if black were to play a natural move like e6, for example, then I believe, I was thinking bishop b5 is surely just winning in that case. And indeed, bishop b5 is just very strong because, well, king e7 is obviously failing to, for instance, queen a3, and in the worst case, you're going to be winning the rook with the fork here. I'm deliberately not playing on moves on the board to test your visualization skill a bit. What if they play knight bd7 instead? Then how does white win a piece from here? Well, it turns out you have 2 ways. Both are based on removing this defender of the d7 knight. I can either do it with bishop g5, which is probably the simplest way. If you want to do it with g4 and g5 ideas, then that would also be completely winning for white. Black just doesn't have a good defense to this. So if they play a move like knight fd7 instead of knight bd7, well, then we just crash through with move g4, just kicking the bishop back. Now after bishop g6, what do you think is the follow-up for white here? Okay, turns out technically d5 is also winning, but the most clinical is h4. In this way, we simply play h5 to try and win the bishop, and black's ways of defending it don't really work that well, because if you play h6, then unfortunately the light squares are a bit too weak. We overwhelm the f7 pawn with knight g6, overloading this pawn. After takes and queen takes, it's just completely lost for black. Queen e7, then even queen d5 looks quite strong, simply winning the rook in the corner, and black is just completely lost here. So as for the move queen to b6, we're actually going to see a similar position in the game, but just to cover it here, it turns out that the move knight takes d5 is actually really strong. If they play knight d5, it'll actually lead to the position in the game that we'll see in a moment. Whereas if they play queen f6, then You may have already noticed that white is not losing material here because of the intermediate move knight takes f6. After e takes f6 and a takes b3. Now white is simply much better in this position. Extra pawn and very nice central majority. Turns out technically they can actually play bishop c2. And technically speaking they do get the pawn back. But the arising endgame is just an absolute nightmare for black. After e3, for instance, bishop b3. I mean, white can even play bishop b5, and it's quite clear after, say, knight c6 and e4 that white just has a very strong initiative. d5 is a big threat. White is ready to castle and eventually bring the rook to the c file to attack the black king in case they castle on this side. So it's just a very thankless defensive task for black, and he is indeed clearly worse. So that explains why c takes d5 works. In the game, MVL played knight takes d5, which I used to think was black's best move, but really both of the captures look quite poor for black. And again, Ding played queen b3, once again hitting this pawn. I mean, black's best move here might be to play knight takes c3, but that's obviously a concession. And after bc3, we have made our central structure even stronger. And white has various plans he can choose from here to get an advantage after queen b6. Personally, I like the idea of either playing knight e5, or maybe even just g3 and just fianchetto the bishop and get the nice Catalan pressure down the long diagonal. Well, in the game, MVL tried to hustle with queen to b6, which indeed transposes to the move we saw before. Do you remember what white should play in this position? Okay, it's not an exact transposition actually, but it turns out knight d5 is again the correct move. MVL played c d5 in the game. If he plays queen b3 instead, then white has an annoying intermezzo of knight c7, say king d8, a takes b3, and again white's not winning material, but he just gets a very strong initiative with bishop f4, king c8, and now knight d2 is a really nice move where we force the e4 break to take over the center, and it's just a clearly better position where black has no real counterplay and the king is not that great on c8 either. So it might not be winning by force, but obviously it's very pleasant. Instead, MVL, after knight d5, played c d5. White simply took the pawn, queen d5, e6, queen b3. We don't really mind the double pawns here as whites, because after queen takes and a takes b3, well, our rook has now developed very actively on the a file. Now, as you may recall from the last time, black can regain the pawn with bishop c2. And actually you could still play this e3 and bishop b5 idea I showed in the other line. Or alternatively you can play bishop to d2 and just have a clear advantage. I think if black takes on b3 you get in e4 in one go, which is quite nice. And if knight c6 to try and be tricky with the move order, then the simplest is probably bishop to c3. And black actually faced some problems with the bishop if he were to play bishop takes b3 here. I think that you can either play knight d2 and kick the bishop that way, or you can go a4 and with knight d2 say that the bishop is a bit short of a good square. And then with white having such a strong center, he is clearly for choice. Still, I guess at least in this line, black is not going to lose in 16 moves like what happened in the game. So in the game, black played knight c6. Ding played the move e3, which is, I think, an improvement on the move bishop d2 that I had in my files. And here I think MVL appreciated that, well, he's a pawn down, and if the position plays normally, then against a player of Ding's caliber, he will probably lose. So while going into the pawn down ending probably gives the best drawing chances here, at the same time you are down a pawn for nothing, so it's not a very appealing option even when you only need a draw to win the match. So MVL tried knight b4 hoping to confuse things, and well, the threat is to play knight c2, but Ding found a very strong reply to ensure he keeps his advantage. So what's the move that you think Ding played at this point? Okay, I'm sure you've had a bit of a think about it and paused the video if you needed to. Well, the key move here is, well, we can't really stop knight c2, but what we can do, and what indeed we should be looking for at first when your opponent makes a threat, is to see if we can make a stronger threat of our own in reply to keep the initiative, to keep the control of the game. And that's why the move queen a4 is really good, because whichever way black blocks a check or gets out of check, it's going to be some sort of concession. And I mean, you didn't really have a good way to stop knight c2 anyhow. So a move like king d2 is just really putting your king in a lot of danger for no real clear benefit. So queen a4, well done if you found this move. I think the best move for black is probably to play knight c6, but then you've kind of given up a move for free in a sense. And if white wants to keep things simple, even just queen b5 is offering the trade of queens, a generally good policy when you're up in material. And you can just get the piece out very easily with a super comfortable and I'd say close to winning position for white. If black were to play king e7 instead of king d8, which was played in the game, well, actually white could play in a similar way to what happened in the game, with a very nice move here of knight e5. Again, continuing to play with a lot of threats rather than submitting to the opponent's agenda. The point is that knight c2 and taking the rook is not as big a threat as it might seem, because here if black does play knight takes a1 instead of dealing with queen d7 check, well, white has a mate in 4. Let's see actually if you can spot the mate in 4 all the way from here. As always, you can pause the video if you need more time to think about this puzzle. Take as long as you need. And the answer, as you might have guessed, is queen d7 first. And after king f6, queen f7, we see just how powerful the queen and knight are as an attacking force. And after king g5, the fastest mate is e4. Bring the bishop in a check, in the attack with a check. After king h4, simply g3 is mate in that case. So not too difficult, but I don't mind testing you and seeing just how well you can find the key moves. Since that's how you become a stronger player in general, is by solving these exercises and pushing yourself rather than just listening to me and getting out the popcorn as such. So after king to d8, again, Ding found a really great move in this position. Maybe knight e5 is not such a bad move again, but I think Ding's move is even better. Well, the move that he played is bishop d2 exclamation mark. And the point is that it actually shows that this knight c2, knight takes a1 threat is really not that real. But on the other hand, if you give white time, say you play f6 to stop knight e5, well, then white just consolidates the position of rook c1, stopping rook knight c2, taking control of the open file. And with moves like a3 if necessary to kick the knight away, I think white would just be winning with best play here. Though I guess this is a bit better than what actually happened in the game for black. Because in the game, black thought he could at least try to make things murky with knight c2, king e2. And obviously you can't take the rook in this position because bishop a5 is then winning the queen with the pin. An important tactical point, and now we see why this move was a good one. So MVL played queen b2, I guess hoping just for some miracle that white would panic and defend the rook on a1 in some way. But as I mentioned before, we should first look for the more aggressive ways to deal with the opponent's threat. So what might be a good counter threat for white in this position? Okay, the answer is not rook c1, although that move would still give a very good position. But it's not just crushing the way Ding's move is. Ding played knight e5, threatening the mate with queen to d7. I mean, it's a thing, when you threaten mate, the way they can really ignore it is with, let's say, some move that's just completely stops the mate threat, or in a sense gives checkmate itself. So anyway, after knight e5, black played b5. I mean, obviously there's must be some way to deal with queen d7, but you know, if you play king c7, then white just plays queen d7, and well, it's mate either with king b8 and queen to d8, or king c6 and knight c4, and after king a6 you could even do better than taking the queen, because you have queen a4 checkmate here. So the king doesn't really have a safe move. There isn't really a good way to defend d7. So that's why black blocked the attack with b5. After queen a5, the queen just comes in the attack. I mean, if king c8 and queen a6 will bring the queen in the attack with tempo, and I mean, it's quite clear with the queen and knight into lone king that black is just completely busted here. And if king e8 is played in the game, again, Ding found the most precise move that basically prompted black's resignation. The move he played was queen to c7, threatening queen d7 mate, threatening queen to f7. And if you play a move such as bishop e7 to block those threats, then queen c6 comes, and well, you can see for yourself it's forced mate with king f8 and queen a8 and bishop d8, queen d8, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So yeah, this was a pretty crushing miniature by Ding, and well, it's very rare that you see a top GM lose like this. You know, in any sort of game, even in a blitz game, it's really quite shocking. But it shows the importance of kind of remembering your moves and actually playing your opening correctly. Because if you're playing strong players and you rely on making it up as you go and just following the general principles, well, the problem is if they know all the best moves already, it gives such a big advantage that it's hard to really come back from that in a way. So it is important to know your openings as well, not just for getting a good position, but also just to make sure you don't lose without not making any moves without the opponent not making any moves of their own. I speak from my own experience as well, because I had a blitz session where I tried to just make up the moves and play as if I didn't know theory, and it was basically a complete disaster. So, you know, even I can't sort of get away with this sort of thing as a Grandmaster. You know, the theory is not something you should be afraid of. It's good to study, and it's good to learn how to punish the weaker moves that you'll often face in your own games as well, like bishop f5, which I think you'll see quite a lot if you're playing in junior or club level tournaments. So I'm really glad I could help you with this video. As always, make sure to show your appreciation by liking the video, leaving a nice comment, and if you want to keep up to date with more free chess content like this from me, Grandmaster Max, then make sure to click subscribe, and well, I will see you in the next video. Have a good one.